I've known Pava LaPere for years, and I draw a great deal of inspiration from her as a leader, as an entrepreneur, as a critical thinker, as a movement maker. What we are trying to do with this podcast is create real value. That's the end goal with anything that we produce. And so this is one of those times where I am more excited than most because I feel that between Pava and I, we're going to create some value, some tangible, actionable lessons or learnings or perspectives that you can take with you. And that's the game. That's what we're trying to do. This whole thing about permanent beta is my guest here is absolutely lives into that. Someone who's always learning, never done, even with all the success she's had so quickly in her career. So my guest today, Pava LaPere of EcoMap Technologies, and we're just so excited that you are with us here today. Thank you for joining us on our podcast. Pava, it's always a blessing to see you.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. But more importantly, I'm just so thrilled to be able to catch up with you.
It is, as friends, this is where it's that sweet spot.
Yeah.
Where we can just be friends and we can just talk shop, which you and I have done for years.
Yeah.
And an opportunity for us to do that in a way that's beneficial to anybody that's listening. And so as you've heard me say, Pava, our listenership is really small to mid-sized business owners and leaders. And so the people that we tend to work with and that gravitate towards our work are those that constantly want to be better, right? And so immediately as we were putting this podcast together with our producer, we were talking about who can we bring on that can create that value, that can just be authentically real and deliver that. And so that's why you're here with us tonight. So thrilled. And so straight away, sort of framing what we're trying to do today, a couple things. What I just said in terms of some of the business essentials that we can learn and just share with each other. It's not pedantic. It's not prescriptive. Yeah. It's just perspective. It's just learning. That's number one. But number two is also there is a secondary intent, and that is to celebrate women leaders, right? And we just need to get on that as much as we possibly can and keep beating that drum about what that looks like and some of the opportunities as well as the challenges that are inherent with that dynamic. So here we go. We're going to have fun. Let's get after it. So Pava, first of all, thank you so much. And just tell us about what's the headline right now for where EcoMap Technologies is in your business life cycle, because it's been fascinating to watch the growth.
Yeah, absolutely. EcoMap started when I was a college student, and I was trying to help these students find different resources that they can use to grow their businesses or to, connect with Baltimore's tech ecosystem. And I really wasn't thinking about starting a company when I did it, right? I just figured that it would be really helpful if people had access to information about what existed around them. What were those resources? What were the other businesses? What organizations were there to help them on their journey? So I threw together what was really an MVP and put it online for Baltimore. And I wasn't thinking much of it. I had done a lot of research into ecosystems. I knew that they had a lot of challenges building these platforms that help people navigate them. But I still wasn't really thinking about EcoMap as a company until 2020. And that was when, people started to stumble across the site we had built for Baltimore. And it just absolutely took off and really never stopped. So to be honest, the pandemic was a really mixed bag for a lot of people, but for us especially, because the company did fantastically. We grew from 3 unpaid people working out of my apartment to a team of 16 now, and we've learned so much along the way. And the biggest thing of that is you can't stop learning, right? You really have to always be iterating and always be open to the lessons, because with a business growing at this rate, they never stop coming at you.
Thank you for saying that. And when you talk about going from 3 to 16 people in such a short time, how do you continue to have that message be true? How do you find such talented people that believe the same things that you believe in terms of we've got to keep learning. Like this is going to be not only a business imperative, but a cultural imperative for EcoMap.
I actually think that's one area where my young age was a bit of an advantage because I did not have corporate experience. Like the only real boss I had was when I worked at Carrabba's in high school, you know? And so we really didn't have a choice about being authentic because I literally didn't know how to be corporate. I didn't know how to be professional. And so when we went out to hire, we were just immediately honest with that. We were like, look, we're a company who's trying to make information more accessible. And we have an idea of what we're doing. We have a lot of customers that are backing us and really believe in this as well. But we really put it out there in the application process that we're still trying to figure it out. And we need people who are comfortable with coming into a job and knowing that it is their job to figure things out, not to be told to do something and then necessarily just execute on that.
We could really just stop there and spend the rest of our time talking about just that. That is such a meaningful point that you just made. And I hope it is an impetus or maybe an encouragement to anybody who's listening, which is maybe you should rethink your paradigm about how you are attracting talent. It's a big deal. And I love the fact that you felt that you were unencumbered by any, I don't know, maybe some scar tissue from previous corporate experience. And this is how you authentically lead, right? This is how you lead. And I'm so grateful that you said that because it could not be more of an imperative today, especially as we're having so much challenge in attracting, developing, and retaining top talent. But what we haven't heard, the audience hasn't heard yet, is the fact that not only have you been the founder and CEO of EcoMap, but you were also the founder of TCO Labs when you were at Johns Hopkins University. And not only that, but you were also instrumental and a incredible force of nature is how I describe you in the entrepreneurial movement within Baltimore, which is now transcended to the national scale. But tell us a little bit about how maybe your work at TCO Labs and within the Johns Hopkins entrepreneurial ecosystem helped to prepare you for what you're doing now as an entrepreneurial CEO and successful one at that.
Yeah, so I always like to say my career progression went a little bit backwards. You know, I went to Hopkins to study medicine like so many people do, and then quickly realized two things. One, don't really do well with blood. So that was a bit of a non-starter.
Okay, good to know, right?
But then two, I wanted to have impact at scale, right? And I was, coming out of high school, and it was actually around the start when the Syrian war was really, in the depths. And I remember feeling like I needed to be able to help people beyond just the one-on-one impact I could have as a doctor. And so that really led me to get interested in entrepreneurship and to see, okay, well, the physicians who have impact at scale are those who bring different devices or innovations to the market. And so when I got to Hopkins, I was fired up about entrepreneurship and really wanted to get involved in the entrepreneurial ecosystem there. But at that time, Hopkins didn't really have an entrepreneurial ecosystem. And I think that was really one of the defining points in not necessarily my career, but in how I approach work. Because me and a group of friends, Anthony, Brooke, we sat down and we looked at it and said, we could either pursue our passion of entrepreneurship outside of an ecosystem, or we could be the ones to build it so that in the future, no student ever has to wonder what they should do if they have an idea for a startup. And so before my job was to start a company or start anything, my job was to build an ecosystem that made it possible for people to start those initiatives and start those companies.
It's incredible that you're saying this because you've actually spoken truth to reality. And for decades, as another Johns Hopkins alum sitting here next to you, it was, wow, we really need some more cogent and organized approach to how we're doing or how we're thinking about entrepreneurship, and shouldn't we serve that constituency on campus? And as we're looking around as alumni, gosh, I wish somebody would do something. Here you are, you appear, and you do it. It was a seminal moment. It was an inflection point in the university's history, and I'm not overstating it. what you did and what you created with TCO Labs, and it has changed the trajectory. Wouldn't you say? And that we have a better coordination across all the Hopkins campuses as a result of that.
Yeah.
We have organizations that are starting now through the Hopkins ecosystem that are now going national and international.
Yeah.
So I don't want to put words in your mouth, but clearly maybe a foundational moment for you to allow you to think even bigger when you then went into what you created with EcoMap.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think we can't claim all of the credit for the development of that ecosystem because, of course, the university, JHTV launched a kind of top-down entrepreneurship division.
Sure.
And that is what made me realize the value of ecosystems in general, right? Any one organization can work on what it's doing in a silo, right? It can have its limited network of partners, but we don't move systems in that siloed manner, right? You can't turn Baltimore into a thriving hub for tech if every organization is just running in its own lane. And that was where my interest in ecosystems really started, because you can start a social impact company and help, thousands of people, right? You can start an incubator that helps people start companies that can help dozens of thousands of people. But what if you can build an ecosystem that makes it easy for people to start incubators that help people start companies?
Yeah.
And we see, not only countries, cities, states, regions, individual companies now thinking through this ecosystem approach because they know that if they can mobilize their systems to work towards the same collective outcome, that they're going to get there quicker and they're going to do it better. And I learned that lesson at TCO Labs, and that is the foundational principle of EcoMap, is that you can't really use an ecosystem, leverage it, grow it, if you don't understand what is happening and you don't have a way to make that invisible ecosystem visible to the people you're serving.
That's a great way to say it. So let's go there. Let's hover there for a second. Help our listenership and viewership understand some of the foundational principles of successful ecosystems and how EcoMap helps organizations build those.
Yeah. I always find it's helpful to start from square one. When we're talking about ecosystems, we're not necessarily talking about the green type, but there's a big overlap. Ecosystems as we use it are these ever-changing networks of different, people, resources, organizations, and activity that's happening between them. And this structure is pretty much everywhere around us. You have entrepreneurial, tech, and small business ecosystems, but you also have industries. Those are ecosystems as well. Your corporate network is an ecosystem. Even your personal network is an example of an ecosystem. And just like the green ecosystems, you have all of these different component parts and they come together. Sometimes they work together. Sometimes they're just synergistic. But they're all working towards that same outcome or united by a common characteristic. And what we do at EcoMap is we turn those invisible networks full of all of these invisible assets, the different organizations, the people and resources, and we make those visible through platforms, right? We eat in a bunch of information about what is going on in that ecosystem, who is doing what, and then we put it into a centralized location that anyone can access so that they can have visibility into what's going on and to connect with the other parts of the ecosystem to help move their business, their career, their program forward in an ecosystem-based way. Well, we've seen a lot of success with entrepreneurial ecosystems, and I think that's largely rooted in the fact that pretty much every town, city, state is having to rethink its economic future. And all of the businesses within them are as well, right? Our economy has changed dramatically over the past few decades. We globalize, now we see a shrinking, and every single business has to be thinking about what is my economic future? What is my economic future in this region? And regions are thinking about how they keep their businesses not only, local, but also thriving and to help them compete in this hyper-globalized world. And so we've seen a lot of movement around entrepreneurial ecosystems, but we've really seen it across the board, right? Think about the Web3 movement, right? There's an entire new industry that was born, and you have a bunch of people who are major players, but there's still most of the population who doesn't even know what Web3 is. And the leaders of the Web3 movement know that the ecosystem is inaccessible, right? And so we've seen this drive towards accessibility across the board, because whether it is a city who is trying to turn itself into a tech hub, you need to showcase all of the assets that you have. Whether it is a corporation who wants to showcase its partners or its suppliers, it's that same motivation to make the ecosystem accessible so that it's easier for their target audience to tap into it.
This is so glad that you are actually sharing this language and these words and these experiences with our group, because it is absolutely one of the great challenges of this age, and you're bringing clarity to something that's very opaque.
Yeah.
And we need more of that. And I want to address, given the fact that we are in Women's History Month and we are celebrating not only leadership, but women's leadership specifically. And I would love to hear what some of your experience has been in terms of the challenges that you have seen as being a female CEO in an early stage business that's thriving and growing, but not without challenge.
Yeah.
Right. And maybe on the other side of the coin, some of the things that you see as becoming better in terms of maybe in that gender equity realm. If you could speak to that, I think we would be really good it would be wonderful to hear from you about that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I like to think that my experience, especially with my team members and with our customers, has been uniformly good. And I can't say I've necessarily felt any discrimination on my gender there. But where you feel it very strong is with investors. And I wish I didn't have to sit up here in 2022 and say that. And what was most shocking to me is not that discrimination exists, but it's how it presents itself, right? Like, don't get me wrong. I have had investors grab my leg. I have had investors ask me if I plan to have kids. I have seen that explicit discrimination where I don't think they would ask a male founder that. I don't know. I don't think they would do that to a male founder. Right. But that is not where it's the most nefarious, right? Okay. Where it really presents itself is the fact that I go through so many more tech reviews where investors want to look at our code and look at our technology than any male founders that I know. I have pitched with way more traction and way more market validation than, companies founded by men and not gotten that same investment or that second look. And we're very lucky that we are now on the other side of that traction curve where we have investors who are coming to us. But the amount of financial metrics we have had to have, the amount of success, the brand name customers that we now have is par none compared to male-led companies that could get the same amount of money with a napkin idea. And that is one of the harder problems to solve. And so thankfully, we are seeing a lot of improvement in the money going to female founders. And when I say a lot of improvement, I mean like we've gone from like 2% to 2.4%
incremental progress, right? Yeah, the incremental is small, but
it's small.
Yeah.
But I don't know if it's great or not, but when you look at the numbers, the amount going into female-led or Black-led companies is rising because there are more female and Black investors. Unfortunately, there has not been a lot of movement in the old white men writing checks to diverse-led companies. But we are seeing more diversity in who is managing those assets, who is partners at the VC funds. And that honestly gives our team energy because we know that when we're successful with this, we will be the ones writing the check.
No, I love that. And obviously anybody who knows EcoMap Technologies, you are a foundational element of who you are is steeped in diversity and accessibility. How have you done that? Because there are a lot of business leaders out there who are wondering, I want that to be me, right? So how do we do that? How have you done that?
I think, our team right now at EcoMap is incredibly diverse, and it was like that from the beginning. And I think that's one of the really hard things that businesses face is that if you don't think about diversity on your team from the get-go, it is really hard to reverse course later.
Right. That's a good point.
When I started out, I actually made it a point to not hire within my direct network at first. Right. And that can be a little bit counterintuitive because if I went to my network from Hopkins, it would have largely been white upper class people, right? Who shared pretty much the same background and context that I had. And we're building a company that is applicable to all types of ecosystems everywhere. So not only is it a bad business decision, it's a bad, moral decision. And I don't want to be surrounded by people who have the same exact experiences and background as I do. So for our first few hires, I made it a point to go not entirely outside my network, but to second degree connections. And that really helped us establish, diversity and accessibility as a founding principle on our team. And people saw that and they recognized it. And then we had diverse talent applying because they wanted to work at a company where that was important from the get-go. It wasn't an afterthought when it became popular.
No, that's incredible, and I think that it's one of the things that I would follow up on that with is this idea of maintaining, or maybe that's a better word, retaining
Yeah.
that talent. What have you found to be the secret sauce, if you will, for EcoMap
Yeah.
in not only being able to attract a diverse and talented team, but retaining them?
Be more human, I think, is the biggest aspect to it. And again, I think this is something that goes back to my age. I did not know what corporate culture was like. And I didn't know how really inhuman it was. And
Right.
there's one example that really stands out to me. When we brought on our first engineer, which as a technical founder was a blessing to me,
bet.
one of his first days of work, one of his cats got sick. And he came up to me and he was really nervous. He was like, "I'm so sorry. My cat got sick. I need to take him to the vet. I know it's the middle of the day. Would it be possible for me to go?" I was like, "Of course. Like, yeah, drop your stuff and go."
Right.
And he was so surprised that that was our reaction. Because I think in many other situations, like the culture is not human first. It is not person first.
Right.
And we have always been that way because we didn't know anything else.
Yeah.
I didn't know anything else.
That's a beautiful thing.
And that, I think, especially after the pandemic, when so many people have been through so much trauma and we have all had to deal with challenges with mental health, to approach it that you are a person first and an employee second has, I think, been transformative to our ability to retain talent because they know we care about them as people,
Yeah.
not just them as a productive unit.
Yeah, it's brilliantly said. One other point that I think builds off of that, which is fascinating, is that you really experienced your greatest growth in the pandemic, which means that you experience growth in a hybrid environment,
Yeah.
in a work from anywhere environment. How has that changed for you, if
Yeah.
at all? And what can you see in terms of trends
Yeah.
where that is relevant moving forward?
Yeah, it's a hard question. And I think it really depends whether or not people go back fully in person or they do hybrid or they're fully remote on the stage of your organization and of the culture and the nature of your work, right?
Yeah.
We are back in office, right? Not every day. We still have a very flexible work schedule. You know, we try to all gather on Mondays and then we have flexibility throughout the week. But it was important to our team to be in person and have that in-person aspect for two reasons. One, at a high growth startup, you are moving so quickly that you need to be able to lean over your shoulder and ask somebody a question and course correct. Otherwise, you're going to make really expensive mistakes that you don't catch and they trip you up later. But also, we realized that throughout the pandemic, people did experience a major degree of isolation, right? We were cut off from the world. And I think that had a really detrimental effect on, you know, my mental health personally and also throughout my team. And so we knew as soon as it was safe to do so that we wanted that in-person aspect. And I think that whether or not a company is fully remote or in person or hybrid, I think flexibility is really the only trend I am seeing because we know now that a company, an organization is not going to thrive in this next, you know, generation of work if you expect people to be in the office 9 to 5.
No question about it. You nailed it. And I've described it this way in the last couple of years, Pava, which is there's a new work contract.
Yeah.
Like it's a different ballgame. And it has to be rooted in flexibility. It has to be rooted in digital transformation. It has to be rooted in diversity and accessibility.
Yeah.
Like period, full stop. If we're not talking about those things, I don't give you much of a chance.
Yeah.
You know, as an organization moving forward. But that's you're spot on with that. It's brilliant to hear you talk about it in that way. How about in terms of I could talk culture with you for a long time. The burnout factor, the trauma factor, the mental, physical, emotional health factor that is a real part of corporate culture, of organizational culture. How do you ensure, to the best that you can, that your team feels cared for, feels clear, feels connected, so that we're not experiencing some of that that burnout, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
I'm not in love with that word, but
Yeah, I think my perception on this was really shaped by my own experience during the pandemic, right? During that time, a ton of traumatic things were happening. We were isolated. I was living alone, so I was alone for the vast majority of that period. And it was really tough for me mentally, and that was on top of the company growing so rapidly. And so I was simultaneously expected to perform at my peak, and my mental health was at its lowest. And that was really, transformative for me, because I realized that I am someone who has naturally high energy. I can work for long periods, right? It is harder for me to burn out, and I burnt out. And I came to realize that we had to put the mental health of our team members really on a pedestal, because if we want them to stay with our company, right? And if we want them to perform in such a high growth and, yes, high stress environment, they have to know that that is only happening under the condition that their mental health gets taken care of. And we did some pretty drastic things related to that. Like, we're a pretty young company, but we have unlimited PTO. We have, if you need a day off, take a day off. If you need to just stop working halfway through the day and you don't have any major things on your calendar, do it. Because I know firsthand that if you hit that wall, it is so hard to come back.
Sure.
And I think that just our team members knowing that, and also us being honest as leaders, because I am the first to admit, I don't have a healthy work-life balance, right? I have a problem with how much I work. I very much work all the time, and I know it is an issue, and I'm working to fix that. And I am clear with my team that I do not want them to use me as a role model.
Sure.
And I think that's a paradigm shift, because I had so many mentors at the beginning say, you need to set the example for your team. And I agree with that. But if I can't perfectly have a good work-life balance, right?
Yeah.
I need to at least tell them that I don't want you to follow my lead, because I need you to prioritize your health first.
Right. And by the way, I'm being honest and vulnerable and sharing with you that this is something I'm working on, which I talk to all of my CEO clients, which are my clients. This is a challenge we all face, which is, how do I find the harmony, and how do I take care of myself? And, the hardest thing to do is manage the CEO's psychology. Right. And that's a hard thing to do. And so I think it's the vulnerability and the clarity that you bring to that allows people to be like, okay, this is okay. This is, and I think it's remarkable that this is some of your intrinsic belief, your intrinsic gut instincts about how to lead a company. It's remarkable. Believe me, I'm trying to get people who have decades on you to believe that, and to believe that the return on investment is there. Right? Like, people drive performance. Like, can we finally agree to that point? And if we're not pouring into our people and making it okay to be human, we're not going to get the optimization that we're seeking from them. And I hope that we are seeing, and again, as you already said this, it's a generational shift. It's going to take time, and we can sort of set the mark, so to speak, in terms of that. But what are some of the other things that you are finding to be in your high growth company to be some of the relentless priorities for you all to be successful? Because there are going to be people that hear us talk who are experiencing similar growth. And they're saying, my gosh, I don't know how to keep relentlessly prioritized about how to keep this going. How do you manage some of that, given the success that you're experiencing right now?
I think one of the hardest things to manage is figuring out where you should be focusing your time every single day. And that is still something I wake up and struggle with all the time, because there are so many things you can do when you are running a high growth company, so many things you can focus on. And I think one of the things that we have really tried to do to counteract that is look, I am an engineer. I love to build. I love to create products, right? Working on an algorithm is my dream day. But I am a CEO, right? And I need to be spending time that's more strategic on the business. And so I think part of it is we let our team members know, indulge yourself, right? I wake up early and I get, between 4 a.m. to 9 a.m. If I want to do some engineering in that time, then I can do engineering in that time. And so we try to let team members know, like, okay, these are the North Stars that we have to follow. But we also hired you because you are very good at specific things. So make sure you do those things and those things that you love, right? And what we've learned is that when you grow so rapidly, you don't have time to be micromanaging people's works and people's tasks, right? And so how we've started framing it is not, here is something that I need you to do. It is, here is a problem I need you to solve. However you solve it, come back with some ideas for solutions, run them by us if you're not sure. But I'm not telling you this is how you should solve it. I am saying this is the problem. Come up with something. And I think that helps team members really move into their own lane of excellence.
Sure. You're giving them the autonomy to be critical thinkers.
Yeah.
It's like the last thing that we do, maybe intrinsically as managers and leaders, is to give people the freedom and autonomy to think critically.
Yeah.
And as a result of that, you're diminishing the capability and the opportunity. I think you said that so well. And you also used the term North Star, which I do love, which is we absolutely need to have some non-negotiables.
Yeah.
Right. In terms of what we're working towards.
Yeah.
And those can live in harmony with role clarity.
Yeah.
Now you can have role clarity and also have that rhythm that affords us the space to, to move around a bit. And so I think that's important that you've created that for your team. And in terms of one of the things that I've seen in the last couple of years in particular is it's comforting to have the clarity, the clarity of the goal, the clarity of the role, the clarity of how I connect to our mission as an organization, right? Has there been anything in particular that you have leaned on that's helped you as a CEO create some of that clarity for your team, or maybe even for your decentralized command, so to speak, like your next level of leaders?
Yeah, I think it starts, with the hiring process, because the first thing, especially high growth startups, so I think this is true for any organization, there is a talent organization archetype match, right? And that is to say, not everyone is going to want to work at a high growth startup, right? Because precisely that measure of role clarity, especially at early stage startups, is very opaque, right? And so we're transparent about that from the beginning. With any candidate I interview, I'm like, I want you to know that you're coming into work at a growth startup. Your role is going to be ambiguous sometimes. There isn't going to be somebody micromanaging what you do. So I think it starts when you're bringing new talent on board. And if you already have team members, level setting with them to say, like, look, we're entering into this new phase, or we need to have this new priority as a company. Your role may have to shift and be more ambiguous. How do I make that comfortable for you? And if the answer, there are some people who really need that clarity, and that's neither good or bad. And you as a leader, I think as a CEO especially, my job is to move people around the organization for them to be the perfect fit. And I honestly can't tell you how many times that I had the impulse to fire somebody or let somebody go because they weren't thriving in their role. And all it took was a few repositionings, and now they are like absolute superstar members. And I think for CEOs, we need to have a bit of that patience, because there is this advice in startups to, like, hire slow, fire quick, right? But I think that overlooks that your job as a CEO is to fit people into a puzzle.
For sure.
And you have to have the patience to do that.
Well, and you have to ask good questions. This is it's the lost art of listening and the lost art of asking good questions, right? Which is, help me understand, what am I missing? Where could you be more impactful? Where can I put you where you can be more lit up about the work that you're doing? And it's the human connection, because at the end of the day, we're talking about human systems. Right. And so I love the way you just said that, moving people around to be the most effective within the organization. And that could not be more true, but you have to be willing to ask the questions, to take the time to listen, right? And always keep learning yourself. And that's what I'm hearing so much from you, is that nothing's prescriptive, right? We have a plan, and we are going to execute against the plan. And along the way, as we learn, if we need to change and pivot, we'll do that. right? And I can only imagine that with EcoMap, especially in the last 2 years,
Yeah.
you've done quite a bit of pivoting and shifting and moving people around the chessboard.
Yeah. And I think a lot of it is rooted in the fact that we are an ecosystem company,
Yeah,
right?
right.
Is that we do understand that these are dynamic systems. Even within your own company, you are working with a dynamic system. And so being so prescriptive is not how the world works. You have to kind of build in that flexibility and acknowledgement. And I think that's why so many organizations have leaned into that ecosystem approach, not just with their partner networks and their industries, but internally, recognizing that every single person on your team is a vital part of your company's ecosystem.
Right.
And, you may just have to shift them, give them some more sunlight, give them a bit more water before you make that decision to just cut.
No, that's so good. And good ideas come from every corner of the organization, right? And this comes up quite a bit for me in working with chief executives, which is recognition. And what is commonly misunderstood is that recognition only means praise. Mm-hmm. And while it certainly includes praise, it actually includes asking for input, asking for the critical thinking, asking for ideas. That is as much of a recognition piece as specifically calling out something good they've really done or achieved. I could not agree with you more. Maybe one or two more questions for you before we let you go. In terms of how do you manage some of the other elements, the critical building blocks of the organization, like finance, like marketing, which I know is not who you are intrinsically or naturally. Mm-hmm. How do you best handle those things effectively for your organization while staying above the fray, so to speak?
I think all of that is rooted in recognizing when people are better at you at something, right? I think about it all the time. And this is hard for me to say as somebody like an algorithmic developer. Yeah. I am horrible at math. I am very bad with numbers. They do not show up in my brain. And so I am so lucky that my COO, Sherrod, is fantastic there. Mm-hmm. And I think some CEOs would be defensive in being like, no, I am the numbers person. I am the chief executive officer. And instead, I'm like, that is not my natural talent, and it is his. So it's recognizing that excellence in others and that is not a detriment to what you as a leader are excellent in. And you don't need to be everything. I think we've seen enough examples of companies being built around the CEO only to have that collapse down. And I think that's rooted in the fact that those individuals don't recognize that when you're building a company, you should be building it so it can thrive if you left tomorrow.
Yeah, it's brilliantly said. And I want to underscore that one. It's value creation. Where can you create the most value? Yeah. Right? Because the other side of that equation is, if that's true, if we put you in that place to succeed, we will capture value. Right? It's the unit economics theory coming to life. And I would say that's probably a good place for us to stop, because it's just you've been so on point as always. And I go back to the old, I'm going to paraphrase here, the Einstein quote about rather than being someone of success, be someone of value, right? And if you can take that humility, that permanent beta mindset, that willingness to subjugate yourself to the mission, people will follow you, right? You can lead well. But I want to make sure that we give you the last word, so to speak, in terms of what our audience needs to know about EcoMap, number one. And then if there was a parting shot you would want to give to that leader of that growth business, right now, what would be some of that wisdom you would impart?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, on behalf of EcoMap, I would just encourage every organization to start thinking through that ecosystem lens, right? I think we do it naturally and inherently, but the networks around you, around your organization, are the most powerful assets that each of us have. And so if we have been forced into silos over the pandemic, it's time to break those down. It's really time to start thinking about what your ecosystem is, what your company's ecosystem is, what your city's ecosystem is, because we are not going to thrive going into this next generation of work if we continue to run in those silos.
So good.
And I'd say, the wisdom is the same for people who are currently running these companies. Whether your company is growing really rapidly, you're just starting out, lean on the network around you, and realize that the system you're working with in your company is dynamic. Things that seem like they are the end of the world are just one small part of the system, and that system is going to shift, and you'll eventually get to where you need to be.
And we thank you, all of our listeners and all of our viewers and all of our subscribers, for landing with us today. Pava LaPere of EcoMap Technologies, thank you so much.
Thank you, Chris.